What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Star Wars Explained. We have an amazing guest with us today, someone I'm so excited to have back on the show. He is writer of Light of the Jedi, The Blade, Lando, Poe Dameron, Obi-Wan Anakin, The Rise of Kylo Ren, and the current Star Wars flagship title for Marvel. And that's just his work in Star Wars. He's got a new book out tomorrow titled The Endless Vessel. Please welcome back Charles Soule.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Of course. It's a pleasure. I've seen you since last time was London, I think, right?
Oh yeah, had a great time in London.
Very late at night. We were enjoying ourselves, I think, which sounds terrible, but we were at a bar.
Yeah, and Molly cornered you about Buryaga. I apologize for that. She just wouldn't let up. But to be fair, you did dance as she was complaining about whether or not he was alive. So.
Yep. Well, phase 3 is coming, so all those questions are going to get answered before we know it. And I can say the way that all of the High Republic authors felt at Celebration, to see the way that fans were so engaged with those questions, because it's not just did Buryaga live or died, it's a whole raft of people. Did they live or die? It's what's going to happen with Elzar and Avar and Marky and Ro and the Nile, and how is all of it going to go? And we kind of get it from online, but then seeing it in person is always just such a truly powerful experience for us. And so I guess thank you guys, but also everybody else who came up to us and talked to us at the show. It's just amazing stuff.
The panel was amazing to be at, just hearing the unbridled screams of people, fans of different characters. The announcement of Vernestra Rowe in live action that got a major reaction.
As it should. It's amazing.
So exciting, and we'll talk about all of that. But I did think that Celebration was just a wonderful time. Cavan talked about how great your meetup was. How did that go?
I mean, again, every experience was phenomenal. The difference between reading, Twitter or sort of interacting with people in an online way, which is a little bit remote, versus seeing the passion that people put into their cosplay, their analysis of the stories that we're writing, the way that they see the connections that we put in, even if they're subtle, the way that they're anticipating what clues might mean. It's just it's astonishing. And people want to take selfies with us and want our autographs, and it's all very it's very heady, because we work really hard on this stuff, but we also mostly do it by ourselves. We obviously interact amongst the group, which has expanded to basically doubled in size in the last little while, but even that is not the same thing as seeing hundreds or even thousands of people who are totally invested in the thing that you've made. And you mentioned Vernestra Rowe with the Acolyte coming out. Obviously, there's a big High Republic component to Jedi Survivor, which dropped not long ago. It's just, we started this in a hotel lobby bar south of Skywalker Ranch years ago, and the idea that it's gone from those first little weird conversations to this is, I don't know. It just makes me happy. It makes me smile every time I think about it.
It works for the fans as well. As a major fan of the High Republic, playing Survivor, which is also I've really loved Fallen Order. So getting into that and meeting the character Dagan Gera, seeing mentions of the Nile and the emergence that destroyed Kobo's moon, all of these things just felt so rewarding as a High Republic fan and also a Star Wars video game fan. What is that like, to see something that you and the other Luminous authors built, and now it's being passed off to other creators and they're expanding on that? Are you involved in that process at all?
I mean, to a degree. There's obviously there's a lot of internal, I guess you could call them source books or sort of reference materials that are within Lucasfilm and Story Group, and Story Group itself is a great resource for other creators. So it's, none of it is done in a vacuum. I know that Survivor definitely, obviously they clearly referenced and paid attention to the things that we did. I mean, Leslie Headland is an avowed fan of the High Republic, and the choices she's making on Acolyte are not arbitrary. She's definitely trying to include the things that we made and built. So it's great. It feels like it matters. I mean, again, I think it shows in the material that we've created, but we work so hard on this stuff. and to see that other people are respecting it and taking it as seriously as we do is just it's the coolest. You want to, I think it's every, like, I mean, I know it was my, one of my goals when I was like 12 or whatever was to tell Star Wars stories. I certainly I've been telling Star Wars stories my whole life. They just were mostly like running around with my buddies in the backyard, like swinging sticks at each other, right? Pretending they're lightsabers. And so the idea that we all have gotten to tell more Star Wars stories, new Star Wars stories, additive Star Wars stories that are told through our own lens with characters that we created that have now created this era that is expanding into all these other zones. I mean, I cannot imagine. I mean, I can imagine like a very, very, very few things that would be better than this in Star Wars, but basically it's the top of the top, and you just have to sit back and love it and be happy about it and be excited that there's still more to come. There's still a lot of the really good stuff you guys don't even know yet, which is exciting.
Well, I'm certainly excited for phase 3 to start, but we're still in the midst of phase 2. It's starting to wrap up. I believe we still have about a month's worth of comics left, but let's talk about your comic in phase 2, The Blade. In that, you showed us the origins of the Barish Vow, which you first created way back in 2017 for your run of the Incredible Darth Vader series. Did you have that idea way back then, or did you just see a fun opportunity to connect the two eras? How does that work in your own head?
So I know I feel like I keep you guys very busy with connecting various elements of my sort of miniature little chunk of canon that I get to play with. But I'm always kind of like, I just did it. I just wrote a big script that connects another piece of something else that I did into the High Republic time. And I haven't got notes back on it yet, so it's possible that thing I did won't actually go. But as for, it's just something I enjoy. Like, I always enjoy when other authors do it. An example of that, I think maybe the first one that I really saw and connected with was Stephen King, because he writes, he has this kind of central mythos built around the Dark Tower, which is something that he does. But he also has Derry, he has Castle Rock. The idea is that there's this kind of slightly fictionalized Maine where a lot of his stories take place. And then there's the Uber narrative of the Dark Tower. And so he will have characters from different stories popping up here and there, and just sort of like you can tell that there's this sort of connective tissue to it, which I always really, really liked. And because I have been fortunate enough to be able to write Star Wars in so many different eras, from High Republic to sequel trilogy, I think I am not certain, but I probably have close to the broadest time span of any Star Wars writer right now. I could be wrong, but I think maybe. And that just lets you drop stuff in, right? It's all one history. So something that happened 300 years ago could directly influence something that happens in the Star Wars present day. And it's a fun thing. So I enjoy it personally. To answer the question you actually asked specifically, I did not know that there was going to be a lightsaber gunslinger guy who had a sister who had the same name as Barash, and so on and so forth. Like, I didn't know those things. What I knew was that this was something very old for the Jedi, something that had been around for a long time, something that was part of their lore that seemed like it made sense, right? Like there are times when you need to step away from active duties in any field to just sort of get your head straight. I mean, academia has a sabbatical, and it's kind of that idea. And so it seemed just like something that would make sense. But the core to it, the thing that I think makes it interesting, is that it's usually born out of a gigantic mistake. It's born out of a time when the Jedi who takes the vow, the Barash vow, has been listening to the Force in a way they think is very clear, and they think they've gotten clear guidance from the Force, but it turns out they were utterly wrong. They blow it. And so they have to kind of get their head straight and listen and hear the Force again. And I would say that there are certainly some Jedi who probably don't ever really get there, or they get there and come out of it the other side and a very, very different person, which is what happens and is okay. Like, I don't think the Jedi Order is as rigid an organization as maybe some would suggest that it is. And I think that High Republic storytelling bears that out. Like, there's a lot of different ways to be a Jedi at different times in the Order's history. The way that Luke Skywalker is a Jedi, the way that Ahsoka's a Jedi, are not at all the way that, say, like, let me think, Jocasta Nu was a Jedi, right? They're just very, very different times, different situations, different frameworks. And so the idea that you would step back from the order to just kind of like get yourself back in order makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh yeah, and I love that flexibility that the High Republic allows. It's been so fun to see. One of the Jedi that I've pointed out several times is Ram Joe Maram, just
Yeah.
a Jedi that I see as almost an inverse of Luke, where he has what Luke wants. Luke is sitting in his garage wishing he could be a Jedi Knight, but Ram is kind of the opposite, where he's like a Jedi Knight, but he only wants to be in his garage and do his thing. And I'm like, that's so interesting and cool.
Yeah. Yep.
To talk about another character or element of Star Wars that you've brought back multiple times, Darth Momin has been popping up for even longer, like 8 years now. When you created that helmet in the Lando comic, did you imagine that being so prolific when you first put it on the page?
It's the same kind of thing. Like when I make something up that's new for Star Wars, I rarely do it in a way that's just kind of like, okay, like this is only going to be in this one place. If you see me creating a brand new character who is not, like Stormtrooper number 3 or something like that, who immediately gets murdered, usually by Darth Vader, if it's a named character that has a backstory that clearly I've thought about and put some time into, then odds are there's more story either backward or forward for that person that I at least have kind of sketched in my head a little bit. And we're going to see some of that in the mainline Star Wars series. There's some new characters that are popping up. Does it mean I'll ever get around to using them? I don't know. Maybe. I certainly think it's fun to think that they can. And I've been working in Star Wars since 2015, and I've gotten around to a lot of callbacks and references and bringing things in again, which again keeps you guys very busy figuring out what I'm referring to. But whether it's locations or characters or weapons, or like I still want to tell the story of Dracostanu's lightsaber rifle at some point that he uses in the Vader series. So I'll get around to it. Like I'm not going anywhere, so there's plenty of time.
Great. And you mentioned that you are a Star Wars writer that has touched just about every major corner of the universe, from the High Republic all the way to, you've written one of the very few stories that take place after the rise of Skywalker. Is that challenging to bounce around the whole timeline so frequently, or is it kind of refreshing that you get to tell a variety of stories?
One of the things that's nice about it is that it gives me a chance to research stuff and go and revisit things. So there are areas that I'm very, very strong in where I feel like I've memorized everything. And then there's areas where I'll need to check in a little bit. Like I'm the I think it's called the dark times is what people are calling it now, between episode 3 and episode 4. And a lot of that material has been explored in secondary media, right? So it's things like books and novels and comics and stuff like that. And I've pretty much read it all, if not all of it. But you still like those are zones where I'll have to go back and research a little bit or review a little bit. Some of the, there are elements post 6 that I sometimes have to refresh my memory, like what actually happened in Empires, and specifically, like there are a lot of bits that I have, but I need to sort of bone up on it a little bit, so to speak. But that's cool because it gives me a chance to revisit these books that I like, or these stories that I like, or these comics, or these video games, or whatever it might be. So, and you guys are often very helpful with that. Wikipedia obviously is very helpful with that. There's all kinds, StarWars.com. There's a lot of great resources, and if I really don't know, Story Group is always there to back me up. But I like the fact that I have in my head like a history professor's general sense of pretty much the whole thing, and then I get to dive in and do the deep dives on the research bits that I really want to do. So I don't know. I think it's a real privilege, and it's also really nice to think that Lucasfilm, who is ultimately the arbiter of this stuff, like I don't get to. I mean, I guess I don't really get to pick and choose my jobs. It's always like let's do a project in this way, and then from there it spins out and there's a development process. But I've been asked to write in all of those timelines, from sequel and a tiny bit post sequel to High Republic and like the earliest parts of the High Republic. So it's cool. I mean, how could I complain? It's pretty amazing.
I like the way you say that it's just cool. About a year ago, we learned that you were hired as a creative consultant for Lucasfilm, and your official statement on it was, "It's cool." Is there any way you can expand upon that, about what your responsibilities are, what that looks like?
I can. It is very cool. It is about what you'd think it is. The general remit for me is connectivity, because I work in so many spaces and my work touches so many different things. There's a lot of, oh well, would be cool, what if we did this, pulling things together from different places. So I end up reading a lot of different things. I end up talking to a lot of different people who are working on different parts of the Star Wars universe. I don't have my hands on everything, but I've been fortunate to work with a lot of really, really cool, talented people, and hopefully just make Star Wars better, not just with my own work, but with the galaxy as a whole. So I can't give you specifics. I can't tell you what I have worked on or haven't worked on. That's not the way it works. But it's I'm still doing it. It's still a good chunk of my time, and I really like it. I hope it goes for a long time.
Well, yeah, it sounds very cool.
Yeah, it is.
Well, you recently finished the Kira or the Crimson Dawn trilogy of comics, which they were a blast to read. Kira got pretty close to defeating the Sith. So, in your mind, what was the biggest element in her downfall?
Oh, I think it was just her inability to connect with people and trust. And this is pretty explicitly said in the text. Like I went into it thinking, okay, why does she, like, literally went into the story with War of the Bounty Hunters, the whole, before I even did it, because I needed to justify what I was doing to Lucasfilm to let me bring this character back. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that I was going to use Kira from the beginning. It was what I had, and what was sort of approved was Boba Fett loses Han Solo on his way to Jabba's palace after Empire Strikes Back, and everybody in the galaxy converges trying to get Solo. But the idea was that someone had to have stolen Han Solo from Boba Fett, or taken the carbonite somehow, and who was that person going to be? And I had a number of ideas, but just in thinking about it, I was like, the absolute best person, the person that gives me the most story electricity is Kira, right? Lady Kira, Han's ex-girlfriend, his like high school sweetheart, so to speak, and the person that he, you're not really sure how she stands with respect to him, especially because at the end of Solo, she kind of, like, I wouldn't say she betrays him exactly, but certainly lets him down. The thing he's expecting to happen doesn't happen. And so you know what's happened to her in the intervening years between Solo and her reappearance in War of the Bounty Hunters. You don't know why she wanted Solo. You don't know what her goals were, and so on and so forth. But then when you start building it out, you realize, well, this is somebody who has a very complicated relationship to power, has a very complicated relationship to the Sith, and she was raised in a way where, or grew up in a way, I guess, where she really literally could trust nobody. The one person she probably, I mean, I'm making generalizations based on the storytelling we've seen, but the person she could trust, Han Solo, theoretically, she chose not to save him from herself, I think. And that tells you quite a bit about her sense of self, her worldview, how she sees the galaxy. And so she embarks upon this quest, which is very noble, to try to break down the power structures in the galaxy, to just make things a little bit more evenly distributed in terms of who has the ability to succeed and who doesn't. And she knows the Sith are evil based on her time with, just learning about it from Darth Maul. So she just wants that gone. But when it comes down to it, at the end, she's created these relationships that are entirely transactional. Everybody that she works with, from the Knights of Ren to Ochi of Bestoon, is they're not her friends. They're not really doing this out of love. They're doing this out of fear, or hope for advancement, or money, whatever the motivating factor she decided to do. And I think at a certain level, you can kind of feel that if you're in a relationship that is that way. Like, you feel differently about, I hope you feel differently about your family than you do your boss. It's because it's a different kind of thing. And Kira's inability to take that step for herself is why, in the end, the Knights of Ren they chose the Sith as opposed to Kira, which is a crazy choice on the face of it, but it also kind of makes sense within the story. Like what can we believe? What can we rely on? Well, we believe the Sith are going to probably win because they always win. So we're just going to bet on them instead of the woman who kind of lied to us and used us and betrayed us and got half of us killed. So it's a bummer. I think if Kira had been different, the tragedy of Crimson Dawn may have gone a different way. The Return of the Jedi, we wouldn't have even needed it, which would have been a shame. But anyway.
Well, I thought that you wrapped it up so well. I think like halfway through the Hidden Empire and the Star Wars comic, we saw Crimson Dawn agents leaking the existence of the second Death Star, and immediately I was like, oh my God, Kira did it. She doesn't know she did it. And then in the 5th issue of Hidden Empire, like you say, exactly that, and we get to see her sitting alone while the galaxy celebrates. And now I just gave myself chills thinking about that again. It was such a cool moment of her getting what she wants, not in the way she wanted, and she's just alone while the rebels are off partying with the Ewoks. It's such a...
I mean, the small little bit of victory I gave her was Cordelia, the young woman that she comes out of Ethan Sachs's Bounty Hunters comic. She was a young girl. I think she's about 9 or 10 years old, and she was the heir to 2 criminal syndicates within the Star Wars galaxy. And so in a way, she was orphaned, and so in a way, she was growing up to be somebody who's very much like Kira herself. And so Kira sends an assassin to kidnap her early in the story for reasons you don't really understand, and then has her at her right hand and seems to be continuing to teach her lessons throughout the entire story. And by the end, you realize that was Kira's philosophical escape hatch, or her way to say, even if everything else blows up, I have given this person an opportunity to walk a path that I didn't path. They could be exactly like me, or they could be different, but at least I've set that person up to do something differently. And that, other than her contribution to the Rebel Alliance victory, which are substantial, as we see, even if they're kind of behind the scenes, Cordelia is meant to be her victory in a way, although that's even qualified too, because you don't know what Cordelia chose to do. You don't know where she went, or where she's going to pop up, or what kind of person she's going to be if somebody ever picks up that thread next. But she can tell herself she did a good deed anyway.
Well, and bringing up Cordelia is a perfect segue into my next question, because I think the comics side of Star Wars is where I'm the least knowledgeable about as far as the creative process goes. So what's the biggest challenge when you're writing not only like this new major storyline, but also you're writing your own Star Wars comic, and then you've got Greg and Alyssa and Ethan writing Vader and Aphra and Bounty Hunters, and it's all working together? It's
hard, in the way that the consultancy is cool. I would be lying if I didn't say it wasn't difficult. It is very difficult to do that. It requires a lot of coordination, a lot of discussion. There's a new event coming up, the Dark Droids. I believe it's announced. I'm pretty sure
it is. I have it written down in my own notes, so it's
yeah. So I'm sure we'll talk about it. But so that is a real deal crossover. So the way that I think of these things is I've been working on comics for a long time, and there's different levels of crossover. There's like a state change or a thematic crossover, which is when something happens in one book that makes every other book reflect it. So like if in book A the sky turns red, in all the other books, the sky is red too, but it doesn't necessarily mean that characters are flipping over from one to the other. So that's just like everybody's sky is red, but they're still doing their own stories. That was kind of the way that Crimson Raid and Hidden Empire worked. You saw things happening because Kira instigated the Syndicate War and the end of Hidden Empire with the Force Ripple, and just like things happen, but they don't have to be exactly beat to be reflected in the other books. Whereas War of the Bounty Hunters was a scene-by-scene crossover, which is a very intricately constructed situation when all 4 of the books are telling the same story. And in order to get it, you have to sort of read them in release order, and it all sort of like literally you'll see the same scene from different points of view. And those are awesome when they're executed well. They're murder to assemble, because you really have to get timelines perfect. You have to be in constant communication. You have to show, like, everybody has to understand the rules of the story. It all is very, very complex. And so what I can say is that War of the Bounty Hunters was that way. Crimson Raid and Hidden Empire were thematic or state chains crossovers. And then Dark Droids is another mega intricate crossover. So what we're going to get is story beats that we see reflected directly in the other series. It's our big, like, I guess it's our late summer, because it starts in August, I think. So it's our late summer mega event, and I'm really excited about it. We're meeting a lot to talk about different bits and pieces of it, because there's a whole, like, we're really digging in hard to droids themselves and how they work and how they would deal with a situation where they are essentially kind of prey in a way for this larger entity that is very interested in them, and how they have access to the Star Wars galaxy. And it's very creepy. There's so many, like, scary, weird, horrifying parts to it. It's no accident that it's coming out. The really scary stuff is going to hit in October, which is Halloween month. I don't know. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be really cool, and I don't think people are really ready for what we're doing, but that's good. Surprises are good.
You were answering these questions as if we talked about them beforehand, leading right into my next questions. It's perfect. So I'm very intrigued by the character of Ajax Sigma, who's been set up in Revelations, the one shot from 6 months ago or so. But he's this droid who is violently fighting for the liberation of his kind. And I know you have a legal background, so I'm curious what your take is on droids in Star Wars, their sentience, their roles in the galaxy. It's something that's been explored, touched upon by Star Wars before with characters like L337. But I'm curious your thoughts on it.
Well, my thoughts are going to be pretty clearly expressed in Dark Droids. I would say, if you want the Charles Soule manifesto on droids and Star Wars and how they work and how they sure seem like they're sentient, at least some of them do. I'm not sure if every, like, laborer droid is as sentient as, like, an R2-D2 is, but there is a mechanism that is presented in Dark Droids that helps to explain it. At least the reason some droids seem different than other droids, in my opinion, anyway. The thing about droids in Star Wars is that there are a lot of them, and they're essentially programming, right? And different people program things different ways. They're all sort of works of art, and so art can be expressed in different ways. So the way I see the droids is not necessarily the way that everyone else has to see the droids, but it all makes sense to me, and it makes sense consistently within the story. But that's kind of what I was getting at before, in terms of the close coordination that's required between the various storytellers, because Greg Pak has to understand exactly this droid manifesto that's being presented in Dark Droids, as does Ethan, as does Alyssa, as does everybody, so that we can properly execute those themes throughout the story. So my feeling about droids, again, like, I kind of don't want to get into it too much because I want the story to speak for itself, but my general sense is that droids are executing their programming. They're designed to do things. That is for sure. But there can be a point when they take a leap to a moment of greater understanding, and which I don't think is precluded by anything we've seen in the Star Wars films at all. But I also think things that seem like independent thought and action by droids can also just be programming. Like, there's like a muddiness to the middle of it, where there's a lot of interesting things that can happen. But yeah, I think people who are interested in the way droids operate in Star Wars are really, really going to like Dark Droids.
I think that's the perfect tease, and you don't have to go any farther. Well, I have to imagine that your legal background was also helpful as a writer for stories like Daredevil and She-Hulk, but have there been any Star Wars stories where you've been able to incorporate that experience into this universe?
There are two coming up that will have very significant, very, very significant legal elements. I have been asked for a long time about doing a Star Wars legal drama, because I am known for having written a long run on Daredevil and having written a very prominent run on She-Hulk, and consulting on the She-Hulk show and so on and so forth. Like, being a lawyer writer dude is something that is part of my bio for sure. So I will tell you where, like, one of them, should I just say this? I guess it's not that long before it comes out. I'll hold it. But there's, like, when you hear what it is, you'll be like, of course that's what he was talking about. Of course that's what he was going to do. And it's great. I am really I'm very excited for the first one that will appear. The second one won't appear for a couple of years, but it is very cool, and it's a zone that I have not, like, it's a type of law that I haven't really worked with before. So I'm excited to dig into the real world analogs and then filter that through a Star Wars lens and see how they would approach doing this thing legally. But the other one you'll see much sooner. You'll see it probably around the end of this year, maybe beginning of next.
Awesome. I'll go off script a bit just to say that we have friends who run a blog called The Legal Geeks, and they have occasionally done courtroom, I guess, dramatic courtroom. So at San Diego Comic-Con a couple of years ago, they did a court martial of Poe Dameron where they acted out, and the audience got to be the jury. It was very fun.
Yeah.
But
I know those folks. They've reached out, or I don't know. I'm embarrassed to say that I get a fair number of interview requests that I can't do, but I've definitely heard of that one, and I may have appeared on them at some point. I'm not really sure, but I think they're good people.
They are. They definitely are. But to go back to Ajax Sigma a little bit, he ties into the High Republic era. I'm assuming, we don't know yet, but I'm assuming his time was set apart from like the Path of the Open Hand and the Nile. Do you see yourself already continuing to expand the High Republic era after the main publishing initiative concludes? Do you have more ideas that you want to explore, or do you think you're going to be like, it's time for a break when phase 3 is over?
I have ideas for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. I have so many ideas. It's really more like where should I be putting my energy? Because I have, as you know, at some point we'll talk about, my next original novel. I do a lot of work that is outside Star Wars. I realize this is a Star Wars podcast, which is why we're talking about what we're talking about. But like, I have a lot of things I work on, and I love the High Republic. When all is said and done, I'm going to be the guy who wrote the first novel and the adult novel, first adult novel and the last adult novel, and kind of opened it and closed it. And I'm not going to say no at this point, but it feels like that's a very very good chunk of work to say this is what I did for the High Republic. I mean, I've been, I and the other 4 initial architects we're all still like there is not a High Republic story at any level that doesn't have one of us giving input on it. So I guess you haven't seen that much from me in terms of direct work. I wrote Light of the Jedi. I wrote Eye of the Storm. I wrote The Blade. Couple of those Starlight stories, and then I'm going to write Trials of the Jedi. Am I missing something? Well, Jedi Brave in Every Way, which is the book I'm doing with my daughter, which I'm super excited about.
Broken Blade.
Yeah, The Blade. Is there anything else?
Is the Broken Blade your phase 3 comic?
No, I'm not going to talk about the Broken Blade right now. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm joking. It's not that big a deal, but the Broken Blade is super cool. It's very let's just say that it's really neat. And I didn't drop that tease at the end of The Blade like accidentally. Like, that didn't just sort of show up randomly. But part of the fun of this is having people, hey, wait a minute, he said he was going to do another thing. When is that happening? What's happening with it? And not answering it, and just letting it sit out there. And at some point it will land and you guys will be excited.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, you did it again. Segued into my next question about, so you wrote the first adult novel. You're writing the last adult novel. It feels like a lot of pressure to literally bookend this entire initiative. So I'll just ask, how are you feeling? How are you with that?
Well, I feel like I pulled off Light of the Jedi pretty well. And
I agree. It is one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud of it. And with the finale, with Trials of the Jedi, it gives me an opportunity for the payoffs. And they're payoffs that will have been building up for years. I mean, Light of the Jedi came out in January 2021. Trials is out in spring of 25, I think. And so there will be 4 years of all these setups and all these things and all these amazing things. And I won't hit all of them. Other writers will be having some of the payoffs and some of their stories too. But like, I know pretty much everything that happens in that book already, because we already know. Like, there will be room for interpretation. I'm sure we'll have some ideas along the way, but Like that book is going to just, it is an absolute roller coaster ride straight through. It's like a rocket to the moon. It is, I don't know, give me lots of metaphors, lots of amazing, this is a real amazing metaphor situation. Amazing situation metaphors, they all apply. So I'm pretty confident that it's going to deliver. And I also am really looking forward to flipping back into the High Republic prose field, because I don't write the High Republic the way I write other things. There's a certain, I don't know, like there's a vibe, there's a music to it, no pun intended, right? Like Avar Chris, but like there's a feel to it that is unique, that I'm excited about. I actually kind of, I wrote one of the stories in the For Light and Life anthology that's coming out, I think it's September, which is the big sort of bridge YA anthology that all 10 writers have something in. And my story is about Bel Zettifar and Loden Greystorm, obviously set before the Rising Storm. And then, you know, so I was able to, I don't know, just click back into them so quickly. And it felt amazing. And so I'm feeling excited about writing Trials of the Jedi. I'm not jumping into it for a little while yet. I have basically the rest of this year, and then 24 is going to be pretty much spent on Trials of the Jedi. So I think people should be excited about it. There's some really cool scenes in there. I think it's going to be really fun.
Perfect. Well, and I think that's another great segue into your work outside of Star Wars, because I'm very interested to know how your writing differs when you're writing the High Republic versus your other storytelling. I'm actually in the middle of reading Anyone right now,
Oh, awesome.
and I actually think that it has a familiar structure to Light of the Jedi, where you're bouncing between characters and time periods, and each chapter ends with a little cliffhanger. And I'm like, I want to know what happens next here, so I have to read the next 2 chapters, and then like the same thing happens every chapter. So how do you see the differences in writing Star Wars versus your original works?
Well, the thing you identified is something that is in all of my books. The sort of, you finish a chapter and you really, really, really want to know what's going to happen next. Every chapter is essentially an issue of a comic, you could say, where it ends with a huge sort of tease or a twist or something that makes you really want to continue and see where it goes. I think every novels take everything I have. I'm not a casual novelist. They're by far the hardest thing that I do. And whenever I do one, it represents usually at minimum six full drafts of writing and rewriting, which is, you know, these books are at least 100,000 words a piece. And so going through and, you know, I write the book, and then I rewrite the entire book, and then like every word, every sentence. And then from there, it's about fiddling and tweaking and seeing what people think might be missing when I have outside readers and so on and so forth. So they are incredibly labor intensive. I think that's why hopefully they feel the way they feel. They feel very meticulously crafted on every level. But, you know, I don't know. I love them too. It's like everyone is a Mount Everest for me. And the idea that I have an audience that supports that kind of craftsmanship, like it's really, it's cool. You know, like I've got trying to think of a comparable example, like somebody like a I don't know, like a woodworker who makes really elaborate carving, or like see, the thing is, when I start pulling these analogies out, I start like comparing myself to like Michelangelo and things like that, which is not my intention. But the idea is Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Bernini, like people like that had patrons who were able to indulge somebody in the years it might take for them to, say, paint the Sistine Chapel, or listen to me again, I'm doing it, I can't help myself. My books are not quite that level, but they do take a lot of time. They do take a lot of focus. And so I'm very grateful that I have enough of an audience that it's viable for me to put that much time into one project, as opposed to putting it into 20 different projects, which is about equivalent in sort of time. So, you know, have I answered the question? I'm not sure that I've actually answered the question. You can run me back if I'm off track.
I think so. I guess what's the key difference that you feel in your writing styles when you're writing Star Wars versus something original?
Okay, yes, this I can say. So so the difference really is that I think Star Wars is first and foremost about emotions and adventure. So those are the two touchstones that you're really going for when you're writing it. You're writing for, you know, for speed and thrill, and these moments of great sweeping emotion, and whether it could be any, it could be fear, could be sorrow, could be joy, could be exhilaration, any of those. Whereas my other novels are, those things are present in them. You definitely have moments of extreme emotion and so on and so forth, but there's also a level of, I guess, they don't only have to be that. I can sit and take my time in a character study or a moment or a digression that serves the story and serves the themes I'm working with, but it doesn't always have to be quite as propulsive. That said, I think my books are always pretty propulsive. It doesn't matter if it's Star Wars or not. But like, if you look at The Endless Vessel, it's about a lot of different things. There's a whole middle section of that book that is set in 1789 that is about a woman whose husband dies, and she happens to be a woman with financial resources and access to scientific resources. And so she hires her entire crew of like scientists and engineers to solve death, and because she misses her husband. And that is in some ways not that different. I mean, that's kind of what Anakin does when he makes his deal with the Emperor, but it's just, I'm exploring it from a different lens. I don't have to be quite so focused on, okay, when is the next lightsaber fight going to happen? I can, think about this woman's grief when she is, 30, and as well as when she's 70, and how that might evolve. I don't know. There's a lot of I think I'm dancing around the idea of saying that I can explore more like adult and sophisticated themes in non-Star Wars books than Star Wars books, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's more just Star Wars is an adventure series, generally speaking. That element needs to be there, and there are ground rules within it that, whether it's adhering to the genre conventions, and Star Wars is its own genre, I think, in many ways, things you simply cannot do because it breaks Star Wars. You just can't do some things. Whereas with an original novel, you can do anything you want, and you can find whatever way in you want to the themes, which is interesting to me.
Well, you mentioned The Endless Vessel, which, when this interview comes out, the book will be out tomorrow. So congratulations, first of all.
Thank you very much.
What would you like to say to Star Wars fans that you think what will Star Wars fans enjoy about the book? And maybe you kind of already touched on that.
Well, I mean, there's a lot. So The Endless Vessel, I'll give you the quick, like, 1, 2, 3 plot summary of what the book is. You have the world that we live in today, maybe a few years advanced from now, but basically this world, and humanity has been hit by the realization that we're in big trouble, and which I don't think, again, is that distant from the reality we're actually living in. Like, there's a lot of rough things that are circling around all of our consciousnesses right now, whether it's climate change or political unrest, or just a sense of, man, there sure are a lot of us, and there sure are a lot of it's hard to balance all the things that everybody needs and wants at all times. And so the world is sort of getting like, darker and denser, and people are reacting to that in different ways. And some people are kind of just checking out of their existence and being like, I'm just not going to do anything anymore. I'm just going to, like, sort of chill out and hope things work out for the best someday. Other people are literally checking out and dying. And then there's this third group who have decided that because humanity has kind of blown itself up, that no one should do anything other than just pursue happiness all the time. They're sort of like manic hedonists. And so they're going around doing kind of sort of terrorist acts kind of things that are designed to prevent people from thinking too much about the future and just focus completely on the present. So for example, they'll burn a library, because the libraries are designed to, like, learn things and think about your future and build, and they don't really want people to do that. So they're called Team Joy in the book. So against this backdrop of this is kind of what's happening to the world. It's getting darker, stranger, more chaotic, crazier. You have a woman named Lily Barnes, who is a scientist who lives in Hong Kong. She's a British expatriate, and she finds this piece of technology that she cannot explain. It is like leagues advanced from anything. It's in her field. She works in climate change mitigation, and it's so far advanced from what she's familiar with that it might as well be from the future, from aliens or something like that. So she goes on a little bit of a treasure hunt to find out who made this thing, and that leads her to an intersection with the second group I mentioned, which is this group from the late 1800s or late 1700s who decide they're going to actually solve death, and they end up, because they're sort of based near Boston, which is full of Puritans and who aren't that psyched about people trying to solve death. They end up having to build this ship and flee the United States, and they've been sailing around nonstop for 250 years. This group of like geniuses on this ship trying to solve death, and they're the ones who made the device, which is a bit of a spoiler, but Lily's story intersects with the story of that ship, and then the third part of the story opens up, which is the thing that the people on the ship found while they were trying to solve death, which turns out to be the greatest treasure in all of human history. And so that's the best summary I can give. It is full of genre elements. It is full of exciting, thrilling chases and action sequences and all that stuff. But ultimately, it is a story that at its heart is about happiness and how we lose it and how we look for it and where we can find it. I present what I think is my direct answer to this is how we can be happy in this increasingly dark world. I think it's the only way we can be happy in this dark world. And it's very clearly presented. I think just like my thoughts on droids are in Dark Droids, my thoughts on happiness are in this book. So, it's my attempt to write a big sweeping, like an epic, like a big massive story talking about the biggest possible questions of existence and life and who we are, where we came from, what we should be doing. But it also has like cool robots and like laser guns and stuff. There's a lot in it. It's very ambitious, but it's super readable, super fast paced. And I think people are just going to love it.
Philosophical, finding hope in dark times, adventure. That sounds like, it would be right up a Star Wars fan's alley.
I think so.
I read the Oracle year when it came out, just off of having read your Star Wars comics, and I was like, oh, I love his writing in Star Wars, and I have to check out Oracle year. Really liked it, and finally, now that you have a third book coming out, I was like, I've had anyone forever, and so I'm reading that one because I'm a completionist. And really enjoying it. Awesome. I think it's really interesting that you always seem to find little twists on how one person or one thing can completely change society. What other inspirations have you drawn from other stories or universes, or just what inspires you in general?
Well, what you just said is a very true thing. I think that anyone does have the ability to change the world. And I think everybody does change the world just by being alive and existing. I think whether you're the president of the United States or, the emperor of the universe or whatever, or you're just a person who has the people in their life and the things that they do with their life, you are changing the world just by existing. You are hopefully making the lives of the people that you connect with better. You're hopefully making the lives of everybody better by however you choose to spend your life or spend your time. I have an overarching kind of philosophy, which is that, you can put one of three things into the world with literally every single action you do can be sorted into helping, neutral, or hurting. And, sometimes you can't avoid what you do being sorted into one of those categories. Sometimes what you do hurts just by existing, like by being a living human being in this time. To some degree, we are hurting other people, hurting the planet. But there's a lot of things you can make choices about. And I think if you just try to sort your activities as much as you can into that helping category, you have changed the world for sure. We all will change the world just by being alive on it in the time that we have. And it's up to all of us to try to be conscious of the way that we're affecting the world and those around us. So I think my novels are a way to take that basic theme and expand it out into more fantastical and cool and exciting and thrilling and fun to read adventure kind of style stuff. But, if you think about again, I'm not comparing myself to a Jedi, but I also think that the theory of Jedi and how Jedi operate is baked into Star Wars from the very beginning, which is that there are not very many of them. And in a lot of the Star Wars storytelling we've seen, there are like two of them, if any. And so, but yet they managed to make the world pivot around their desire to do good and to be heroic and to help other people and to bring light into the world. And so, in a galaxy of trillions upon trillions upon trillions, there are maybe 10,000 Jedi at their height. And they still manage to be this force that everybody knows about, a force that brings light, a force that does like incredibly powerfully good things just by choosing to do them repeatedly over and over and over. And so, I think that that's like an obvious truth to me, that anyone has the ability to put that light into the world, whether you can use a lightsaber well or not.
I think that was beautifully said. Well, I'm out of questions, so I'll just close out today by saying thank you. You've given me personally a lot of joy as a Star Wars fan. The High Republic is one of my favorite Star Wars things ever. You also got me way more invested in Star Wars comics than I was growing up. But whenever people ask me, what should I read first to get into Star Wars comics, I always say, start with Lando if you want something short, or the Darth Vader run. Like, there's such good introductions to Star Wars comics. But thank you for all that you've given to the fandom.
Hey, it is my pleasure. Thanks for talking to me. I hope people will check out the Star Wars stuff for sure if they haven't already. And if you haven't, if you have checked out the Star Wars stuff and you want to take a spin through my original novels, it's the first was The Oracle, then Anyone. Now the new one out tomorrow as this airs is The Endless Vessel, and I'm super proud of all of them. I don't think you'll be let down. They're all very relatable and fun. So
having read like exactly half of them right now, one and a half of them, I really do enjoy them. They're very fun, adventurous, like you said. And I just, one of the joys of like diving into all of the Star Wars content has been getting to be introduced to new authors that I haven't read before, and then going and checking out their other work. It happens all the time. So I know Star Wars fans can get wrapped up in trying to keep up with only Star Wars. There's a lot of it, but take some time to expand your horizons as well.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. And, I look forward to seeing whatever you make of all the different references and connections I'm going to be dropping into my work going forward.
Oh yeah. You teased plenty of stuff today that I'm already thinking about, but thanks again. And thank you all for watching, and may the Force be with you.
Take care.